Thank you, Asanda from VPASA, for being with us today. So this is session 4 of the conference, and we're going to be discussing the situation in South Africa with regards to product bans of smoking and alternative nicotine products, smoking cessation, illicit trade, regulation, and consumers. So Asanda, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and VPASA, including your role?
Thank you very much, Jessica. My name is Asanda Gcoyi. I represent the Vapour Products Association of South Africa, which is an industry body that looks after the interests of retailers, manufacturers, wholesalers, as well as importers in South Africa.
So I'd like to talk first of all about the 5-month ban on combustibles and smoke-free nicotine alternatives in South Africa, which included vaping products during COVID in 2020. Yeah. So Asanda, from your point of view, what were the intended consequences of that ban during COVID?
From what we understand, I mean, the issue was around the movement of individuals and what that meant for the spreading of COVID at the time. So what the Ministry of Health sought to do was to limit the movement of people. And in movement, in this case, it would be to buy these products, or people going to shops to buy vaping products or smoking tobacco. But another important element, which was, I'm not sure if it was unique to South Africa, but we have a culture of sharing cigarettes and vaping products as well. So what they wanted to do was not only for individuals not to purchase those products, but they sought to limit the use of these products. So they felt that if people did not buy them, they would not be using them, therefore they would not be sharing them and then passing saliva, you know, as they were sharing these products. So broadly, those were the reasons we were given on why these products were banned during that time.
And what have been the unintended consequences as a result?
Sure, we're still feeling those right now. I mean, when you look at how the illicit cigarette market has grown over that period of time, it's staggering. It's actually quite scary because cigarettes were still available, you know. People charged ridiculous amounts for people who wanted to buy those cigarettes. We also understand from our own research, from a vaping point of view, that vaping products were also still available. So you had people purchasing these products from sources that were not legitimate. And the problem that comes with that is obviously a safety concern. So we've seen a lot now that in terms of illicit cigarettes, they've taken over. You know, that's what people are using. And the legal industry, unfortunately, is suffering. We see it as well with vaping products, that we understand that there's still places that are still selling products that we don't know where they come from, and those stemmed from the time of COVID during the ban.
So do you know approximately, in terms of numbers, figures, what level of illicit trade we had in combustibles before the COVID ban and then after?
According to the University of Cape Town, which tracks these numbers quite frequently, before the ban, they estimated that the illicit trade for cigarettes was anything between 30 and 34%. So this is around 2017. And then after the ban, they estimate that I think it's between 54 and 58%. But public information is suggesting that the number could be as high as 70%. But whether those two numbers are true or not, I mean, the important element here is that when you look at the global average for illicit trade, it's sitting at 12%. So whether it's 58% or 70%, it gives you a picture of how bad it is in South Africa. And I think it's still going to be an issue for a long time to come, unless something drastic happens to curb this new illicit market that's brewing.
Which brings us on to tax revenue. So how much tax revenue has the South African government lost due to the ban, do you think?
From public information that's reported in the media, it's estimated that annually, since that ban, 19 million is being lost due to illicit trade, which is huge for a country that has such a high unemployment rate, a country that has many social ills that require resources, to lose that kind of money is not something to scorn upon.
And what impact did the ban have on vaping?
We didn't commission a formal study, but we did our own research as an industry body. And we do know around that time, there were about 4,000 jobs from the vaping industry from various areas. And we know that at least 20% of those jobs were lost. But an important element that is still felt today is that many shop owners had to not lay off their staff, but staff went without pay for that period of time. So people are still dealing with that legacy issue when it comes to their finances. And looking at our economy right now, there's just so much happening. So that impact of the ban is still felt today, even for the vaping industry. And in terms of revenue, we estimate just over 100 million was lost in vaping revenue during that 5-month period.
I'd like to now talk about smoking cessation in South Africa. So what is the current smoking prevalence in South Africa, and has that changed before and after that ban?
We don't track smoking as we ought to in South Africa, which really sometimes bugs the mind in terms of how important we take smokers. So the latest study we have is the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, which the numbers were presented to WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And the numbers there said about just over 11 million South Africans are smoking. When you compare to previous data collected, which was about 2018 or 2017, somewhere around there, the numbers were sitting at about 8 million. So the numbers have grown substantively. It means there's something our health department is not doing right, because in 2022 to have such high smoking numbers is quite alarming.
And for adult smokers in South Africa, what is currently the most effective means to quit or move away from combustible cigarettes?
An informal survey that's conducted annually by a consumer group here in South Africa called Vaping Saved My Life has shown that most vapers are former smokers, obviously, who have used vaping as a way to move away from tobacco. So that study suggests that vaping is the preferred method. We do, however, have a study that is not that credible because there's a whole lot of things that are problematic about that study on the associations between quitting smoking using e-cigarettes and how long that quit effort would last. And it suggested that individuals tried quitting via vaping, but it did not last for a long period. So over 6 months, then people would relapse. However, when I say the study is not that credible, it's because there are a lot of factors it doesn't take into account. And the issue of cost is one of the main reasons why, if you find that people would go back to smoking after a 6-month period, is because they wouldn't be able to sustain the habit of vaping, because it is slightly more expensive in South Africa. But overall, it does seem like vaping is the preferred method to quit smoking.
So in terms of alternative products and vaping, and with that in mind, we know that flavours can play quite an important role for people. So what role do you think flavours play or have played in this quitting or switching behaviour?
Mm-hmm. Again, from the informal survey data that has been collected, a resounding majority say flavours have played a huge role because people are moving away from tobacco. They do not want to be vaping tobacco flavours. And this is an important one for us because our regulation seeks to target that very area of flavors where they want to limit the flavors that are available. But we do know, even globally, the studies that have come out are saying that flavors play a significant role in making sure that people not only switch, but that they stay in vaping and not go back to smoking.
I'd like to now move on to talking about regulation in South Africa. So what do you see as the priorities for regulation of tobacco and smoke-free alternatives?
I think it's important to consider lived experiences, Jessica, and I think it's all good and well to have a body like the WHO that can make recommendations on certain directions countries ought to take. But at the end of the day, a country needs to be realistic of what's happening in their particular country. As I've said earlier, the numbers of smokers in South Africa have gone up. So clearly what we have in place is not working. So if you got quit or die does not work. People don't have access to NRTs. So we need to expand the net and say, what else could we be looking at to ensure that these 11 million South Africans have an opportunity to quit? And I think for me, that would be the starting point where you actually look at what you have right now, and then you expand and say, surely these methods we've been using are not enough. Let's try other methods as well, which is where tobacco harm reduction, the likes of vaping, come in for consideration.
And Asanda, do you think that there is enough differentiation being made between the various categories of smoke-free nicotine alternatives?
In South Africa, no. The current bill, which is currently sitting with Parliament, soon to be presented to the Portfolio Committee on Health, uses smoking and vaping interchangeably. So that's problematic, because that tells you already that the point of departure is skewed. And it tells you also that the risk proportionate alignment that ought to apply to our products is being disregarded. So it is important that our products are regulated differently because they are different to tobacco products.
Yeah. And in terms of product standards then, so Asanda, what role do you think really sound product standards can play in the risk proportionate regulation of these smoke-free alternatives, for example, for vaping products? And then is VPASA active in this respect?
I think what's important, I mean, yes, VPASA we initiated the process for getting standards for vaping products in South Africa. And at the core of that is consumer safety. So product quality is extremely important. And when you look at the risk continuum and you understand that right at the top is tobacco heated, and then you've got your vaping products, you need to ensure that the integrity of these products is not compromised. And that's the role then that product standards would play, where you need a benchmark to say, at the absolute minimum, your products need to abide by these standards. So it's a very important element that we've really been pushing from an industry point of view to ensure that it comes as quickly as possible. It's almost a year now since it has been under development. And we had a meeting just today, and the push is, let us prioritize this thing, because consumers' health is at risk if we do not finalize product standards.
So in terms of science then, do you think that science can play an important role in developing evidence-based regulations?
I think science is the most important element for this thing, because in the absence of science, what do you have? Ideology, and we know we cannot regulate from ideology. And unfortunately, where we sit in South Africa is we've chosen certain science over other science. So it's selective science that is being relied on, and mix that with ideology. And obviously you have the kind of bill that's currently sitting before Parliament. So what we are saying is, again, expand, look at credible science from credible institutions. I mean, the latest Cochrane literature review is something that every regulator ought to have interrogated, looked at it, because we know Cochrane is the gold standard, and what they've said recently about vaping products cannot be ignored. So we've called upon our regulators to say, if you need to commission local studies as well, or take international studies and localize, but you cannot do this thing without relying on scientific data and empirical data for the bill to go through.
And last but not least, I'd like to talk about consumers, which are clearly a very important part of this debate and this topic. But do you feel, Asanda, that the consumer view of vapors is actually listened to and respected?
Unfortunately not, Jessica, it is not. And why I say this is, you'll find there's not enough opportunities being created for consumers to speak about their own experiences, you know, on what life was like before they moved and to less harmful and what's happening right now, you find that often if a consumer is able to speak, it's via a media interview that would be facilitated, or if they make submissions to the formal processes for regulation. But not once have we had an interest from the regulation side that says, you know what, let's gather consumers, people who use these products, and let's hear what they are saying. And I think that is one thing that is missing, because at the end of the day, consumers are the evidence that regulators need to be considering quite seriously.
And how could this issue be solved? You know, how could we improve this situation?
I think forums like this are important. I mean, we are big on the PR element. Media can play a big role, but I think it's really shining the spotlight on individuals. You know, give people the opportunity to tell their stories. We share these testimonials as far and wide as possible, but I think we do need more platforms like these, and not just speaking to ourselves as tobacco harm reduction individuals, but to actually invite ourselves in some of these spaces. And I mean, from a vaping point of view, it is a lot easier for vaping consumers to go to these platforms than it would be for me, you know, representing the interests of business. But I say we need to widen the net and just spread the message as wide as possible and get those testimonials in and just share them out as much as possible.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you very much, Asanda, for your time and insightful answers, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for the opportunity.